Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners across America and around the world. Now, needless to say, I'm always pleased to welcome all of my guests to the program, but I'm exceptionally pleased to have a global technical celebrity on the show today. My guest joins us from the Washington, D.C. area, which also happens to be the area I'm from. She's Kathy Hackl, a globally recognized augmented reality, virtual reality, and spatial computing thought leader. She's been named one of the 10 tech voices on LinkedIn for 2 years in a row. She is the co-author of Marketing New Realities for the first VR AR marketing book ever written. And she and co-author John Buzzell have written a second book, The Augmented Workforce, How AI, AR, and 5G will impact every dollar you make. She has led agencies, brands, and companies in applying augmented reality and virtual reality for marketing and training, including brands like AT&T and Porsche. Kathy has been featured in numerous media, and she is a global advisor for the VR AR Association and was recognized in 2016 by NBC News as one of the top Latina women working in VR. Earlier, she worked at media companies including CNN, Discovery, and ABC News. She received a 2007 Emmy nomination for her storytelling work. Now, if that's not enough, she's also the creator of the world's first holographic press release, and she loves all things spatial computing, artificial intelligence, and futurism. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I'm excited to be here and share some of the emerging tech goodness that I live every day.
Well, look, I tell you, let's start here, because when I noticed that obviously you've been in other media with CNN, ABC News, and so forth, how did you make this transition? What did you see or what did you learn that maybe you're going to make the transition from this media over to artificial intelligence, AR, and so forth?
Yeah, well, so I was always a storyteller, right? And I knew when I wanted to go to college, I wanted to go into journalism. That's what I did. I was in broadcast journalism. I always say that the reason I got into VR and AR is very much linked to my time in journalism. So back in 2004, I was working for CNN, and part of my job there was to look at all the raw footage that was coming in from the war in Iraq. So as you can imagine, I had to see things that were not very pleasant. So I always say I was a Facebook moderator before there were Facebook moderators in some way. So when you see that type of stuff, those types of images, you kind of have to turn your humanity switch off just a little bit just to kind of get by. And for me, it wasn't until I put on a virtual reality headset, 5 years ago, that I didn't feel like I was fully able to turn it back on. I went to a conference, put on a VR headset, went into an experience called Confinement by The Guardian that puts you in a solitary confinement cell that's like 6 by 9 meters, so pretty small, where prisoners spend 90% of their time. And, within minutes, something clicked in my brain. I did feel claustrophobia, but something clicked. I took the headset off, and in my mind, I was just blown away by the storytelling possibilities. And I just said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And then it's been a journey ever since. It's been 5 years now in the industry.
Well, that's interesting to hear how that came about. Now, this book that you have coming out about the augmented workforce and how AI, AR, and 5G will impact every dollar we make. Let's dig deep on that one, because obviously that's going to attract a lot of attention. So how will that begin to, or has it begun to, impact the dollars we're making now?
Yeah, I think we'll see an acceleration. Definitely, through what we're living through now with the pandemic, I think we're going to start to see an acceleration of adoption of some of these technologies even further. When John and I started working on the book, and the book is due to come out in late 2020, we started to think about what is something that's going to impact everyone, whether it is that you work in a warehouse, or whether you're an executive at a big corporation. And we just realized, okay, there are certain technologies that are converging and that are starting to create this change. And while this change is in some ways just starting, it's going to get accelerated and it's going to have an impact. So we wanted to write this book specifically for people in different types of verticals and industries, but that are leaders in their companies, that are up and coming managers, that are executives, that really want to inform themselves about how these technologies, going beyond just the definitions, to really understanding how they're being implemented across different industries and verticals.
Mm-hmm.
So it's changing. And you asked me, how is this going to happen? It depends on the vertical and it depends on the industry. One of the things that we're doing right now, to complement the book, is we're interviewing lots of experts in automotive, in manufacturing, in media, in PR, in a whole bunch of different verticals, and we're kind of trying to understand, where things are at with these different technologies and how it's going to impact the outlook of these careers and the outlook of the industries as well. So yes, it's been a lot of interesting conversations, a lot of exploration. I happen to be a professionally trained futurist. I trained at the University of Houston that has a very well recognized future studies program under Dr. Andy Hines, who's an amazing guy. And I've been able to start using some of those tools of strategic foresight and future studies to also inform the way the book presents different potential futures on how these technologies are going to impact us.
Well, two things from what you've said. One, let's define what a futurist is so that we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah. So, people always hear the word futurist and they immediately think, oh, it's someone that does, makes predictions. It's not really that. I mean, if a futurist is making predictions, it doesn't really align with the academic training and the idea that, academically trained futurists really think. What we do is we prepare people and companies for uncertainty. And uncertainty, obviously, is something that we're living through right now. We help create that long-term strategic thinking, strategic foresight, so that companies and people can start thinking about the potential futures that are ahead of them. It's about helping them prepare for uncertainty and helping them have that long-term strategy.
Okay, I've got that one. Mm-hmm. Now let's circle.
And Peter, can I add something to that?
Certainly.
I think it's actually really important for PR. This is something I've never understood in the last couple of years, is why strategic foresight is not necessarily a big part of public relations. Because PR pros, having been one, we do a lot of, crisis management and crisis preparedness and things like that. And, I personally think that there is room for disruption in PR and room for adding strategic foresight as another discipline for PR practitioners.
It's interesting you brought that up because several months back I had a guy on here, Jonathan Bernstein, had said, because he's a fellow that is well recognized in crisis communications and as well. What he said is that a lot of things could be prevented if people took the time to sit down and anticipate what could go wrong, and then begin to build strategies and policies to prevent that, or try to mitigate it as best as possible. Mm-hmm. But so I think that some people are beginning to and have started to take a look at it. You're perhaps right. Maybe they didn't deal or go down deep enough to fully flesh this out.
And I think when you have a client and you present to them these potential future scenarios of, we call them, potential futures, and you present these to them, and you can kind of work back to how do we prevent this, let's say, catastrophic future from happening, mm-hmm. or what have you. Like there's a whole opportunity, I think, for PR pros in that area. So definitely wanted to include that, since I know your audience is, mostly, business communicators and PR pros.
Well, I think that's a very, very, very important piece, at least, as we look at it from a futurist point of view. Let's also transition into one of the biggest things on the horizon right now is 5G. It, I guess, is beginning to roll out. Maybe we all haven't adapted to it yet, but tell us what impact. First of all, explain how 5G works and what it is, and then how you see that impact the public relations area.
So I am not a 5G expert per se. I have plenty of friends that are. I have a good friend at Verizon, Nigel, who's a superstar in the 5G world. What I will say is that basically it is, we're going to have more bandwidth, we're going to have faster connectivity, lower latency. This will allow for higher fidelity. It will allow for, more faster speeds, more connectivity. It's going to allow for our entertainment to actually go beyond. I personally believe it's going to allow the entertainment to go beyond just our screens, right? Our flat rectangles on our desks and our walls and our hands, into our reality, whether it is through virtual reality or augmented reality. It's going to allow us to have that, that power, that behind these technologies. So, you're starting to see it roll it out. You're starting to see controversies as well. I don't trade in conspiracy theories regarding 5G, so I'm not even going to go there. But it's, it's crazy. But, it's faster connectivity, lower latency, more ability for us to be able to consume content in a totally different way. So, it'll also mean a lot for businesses. Now that we're all being forced to live in a virtual digital space, working at home and having Zoom meetings all day, those things matter more than ever.
Well, that was the big thing that I had gotten out of the little bit I had read about 5G, is that it's going to be super fast compared to what we have now. Fidelity of the visual is going to be even more than it is now. You're right. There are some issues going around about 5G, depending upon who you get your equipment from and all the things connected with that. But it's here and looks like it's here to stay.
It is, and the world needs it. We need that connectivity, and I always say that we're eventually going to get into the 6Gs and the 6G plus or whatever comes next, right? So it's just something that's not going to that's only going to continue accelerating, especially as we move further in digital transformation and being thrust into this virtual world, digital world. We're going to need further connectivity. So it'll be a demand that barring any catastrophic energy, crisis or like of some sort, I don't know, electrical grid chaos. We're going to need those, that connectivity.
Well, now you had been mentioning you have been talking to a lot of people in the PR field and asking them about their perceived impacts of things like, let's say, augmented reality. What have you been getting from them when you talk about augmented reality as well as artificial intelligence? What sort of feedback have you been getting from those questions?
So I'll go through three of the things that have really, gotten me thinking from those conversations. I would say I'll start with virtual reality. So with virtual reality, some of the conversations I've had have been really interesting around, for example, media training and spokesperson training. Because, if you're a PR person and you've trained an executive, you've done the whole thing where you pretend to be the reporter and you ask the tough questions and all that stuff, right? But it's you. It's their comms person, right? Or it's the consultant you hired. But with VR, you can actually put the headset on, if the executive is one of the people that would allow you to do that, they can put the headset on and go into a simulation where they're in a studio and they are faced with someone they don't, necessarily know or what have you, and they can role play that even further. And, you can also critique it a lot better and show it, backwards and say, hey, here's where you were looking down at the desk. You should have been looking at the camera, or, kind of really, really really tackle spokesperson training and media training in a totally more immersive and potentially more effective and more engaging way. So that was one of the conversations where I was like, 100%. I agree with you 100% on its powerful use for this type of, of PR task and PR role. So that's one of the ones. Then with augmented reality, I've had some great conversations on the concept of if if the real world is the canvas with which in which we're communicating, because with augmented reality, you're either using it through your phone or you're using it through glasses that it will eventually come, then everywhere outside becomes a billboard, right? Not just the physical billboards that you see or the Times Square images. Every single inch of the world becomes a possibility for communication, for messaging, from a marketing, advertising, and PR standpoint. So that brings a whole, huge world of possibilities, but also challenges. And then you get into the conversation around ethics, right? Mm-hmm. If we're going to bombard people with information, is that a positive thing or is that a negative thing, right? So that was one of their conversations. And then with AI, what I'm finding really interesting is the kind of this wave in what I'm calling it, and several people are referencing as the synthetic decade. Where you're starting to see more and more of those virtual CGI influencers, like little Michaela, for example, on Instagram, who's, she's got 1.x million of followers on Instagram, and she is a CGI creation. She's not real.
Right.
So you're starting to see a lot more of this. She's not really AI driven, not yet. Well, not yet, kind of, a little bit. But, I think you're going to start to see more of this murky place where we're going to see more of those virtual beings or artificial humans kind of come into play. And then that's where also the PR person, you're like, another trend that is going to impact the way we do our work.
Well, as you mentioned, at least for the AI part, then I have seen some discussion about this artificial person. I forget that. But is there also an ethics question there that maybe somebody needs to make sure that that this person is not real, and we've constructed these things for a specific reason and hoping for certain outcomes as a result of it? Do we need to make sure that we have that on the table as well?
Oh, huge. I think ethics, artificial intelligence and ethics are really critical parts of our conversations. If you want to go even a step further, because I'm always kind of on the edge and thinking about what the edge looks like, right, in emerging technology. And when you start thinking about a little bit further with human augmentation, that means, augmenting ourselves as humans, whether it is through an external device that reads our thoughts or whether it is an actual, implantation of some sort, then you start getting into a lot of ethics as well. So, definitely, my advice, for example, if I knew a young person in, going to PR school right now in college, I would urge them to look at emerging technology and to look at ethics and maybe make that kind of what they're known for and what they're really going to study.
The other question I have now is that in terms of audiences, one of the issues that always comes up in public relations is who is your audience? And how do you deliver that message to them? So, we know, and there's discussions about, as we call them now, Generation Z people who only want to get their messages certain ways, but there's still others out there who get messages, they still read the newspapers. So has there been some discussion about how at least the AI folks are going to be able to manage dealing with these separate audiences?
Well, yeah, from an AI, there's two things I want to mention here. So, yes, from from our software perspective, there's AI tools that are going to be able to, target you better and know what the message, specific message that you want to hear. For example, there's Synesthesia, a startup in the UK that's doing great work. What they're doing is they're actually using AI so that any YouTube video, so let's say Casey Neistat does a video, he speaks English, and through Synesthesia's tool, he is actually, when he posts the video, and let's say you view that in Korea, through using the Synesthesia tool, that person would view Casey Neistat's video in Korean, and Casey Neistat's mouth would move as if it were speaking in Korean. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's all using AI. So imagine the impact that has in the massive reach of content for specific audiences. So that's pretty big. And then the other thing that I'm interested in is what will happen to marketing, PR, and communications when we start to realize in, let's say 5, 10 years that who is your audience, who are you speaking to, when that starts to shift. When your audience, is not only regular humans, but it becomes humans that are augmented in some way. It becomes robots. and it becomes virtual influencers of some sort. So then you're going to have a whole other world of people, people or personas or whatever you call them, that you're going to be needing to communicate with. So, that opens up a whole other world of possibilities and conversations to be had.
Mm-hmm. That also brings up another, I'm not sure if there's a precise intersection here, but we did a story, a program a month or so ago about voice search technology. And if you've got robots in your home talking to robots, say so-and-so to the robot to, turn up the air conditioner or find such and such on TV, is there a possibility that one technical piece will be talking to another technical piece to solve the problem?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, 100%. I mean, and some of them are already talking amongst themselves. We just don't realize it because it's through data. But yeah, to that point, something that really struck me the other day is, I have Alexa on my kitchen counter, and she's great. I use her mostly for stuff like that, and on my kitchen counter. And I was asking her something. See, I'm saying her. I'm already embodying her as a woman. I was asking Alexa something, and she wasn't getting it, and I got upset. And my 8-year-old son comes over and says, "Mom, you got to be nice to Alexa. You got to say yes and please and thank you." And it just hit me because I'm like, I view Alexa as a gadget, even though I'm pretty tech savvy, but to me, she's a gadget that I use.
Mm-hmm.
For him, she's more of a virtual companion, virtual friend, who tells him the weather, tells him a joke, or reads him a story, or even, sometimes answers his homework questions for him if it's math. So they view these virtual assistants in a totally different way. So what you start to see here is that idea of embodiment, and what does the next, whether it's Alexa or Siri or whatever, what is the next phase of that? Is that what is this going to be embodied as in the future?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Kathy, this has been a very fascinating conversation. And one of the other things I wanted to ask you about briefly, and talk about a small world, this holographic press release. Can you give us an overview of how that works, and how does one get access to something like this?
Yeah, so back in, was it 2016? I think back in 2016, I started to think about, okay, what is something disruptive that I could do with, the work I'm doing? So how can I disrupt PR in an interesting way? So I started a Skunkworks project back then, and I was like, I'm going to bring to life the world's first holographic press release, right? It was 2016. I went and Googled holographic press release, and the first hit I got was actually from Atlanta's Daybook, which is kind of a PR tool for press releases and stuff, and they were like announcing in 2015 a holographic press release. Well, they were actually doing it on April 1st, and it was an April Fool's Day joke for a holographic press release, and that was in 2015. Fast forward to 2018 at the PRSA Icon Conference, I unveiled the world's first holographic press release. So it went from science, from a science fiction thing or a joke, a science fiction joke, to actually being a reality. So how does one get access to that? I worked with a company called You Are Here Labs that worked with me on the scanning and on pushing it to through social media, because we released it through Facebook and it was Facebook and Snapchat. That's where you could see the holographic press release. And it was just, a really interesting project. If anyone's interested, feel free to reach out. I can put you in contact with the people that did it, that helped me do it. And it's just a fun project. Fun project.
Well, this has all been very, very exciting, and I really want to thank you for taking time to join us today. I'm sure that our listeners are going to get a lot out of this, and I hope that sometime we'll have a chance to talk to you again in the very near future.
I hope so too, and if anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn, that's where I share a lot of my forward thinking and some videos of amazing tech and everything that's going on. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and thanks for having me.
Again, Kathy Hackel, thank you so much for joining us, and to our listeners, thank you for joining us. And we'd also like to say thank you to our listener, Whitney, down in the great state of Florida. She is also a PR firm owner, and she sent us a very gracious note saying how much she appreciates the program. So we'd like to hear from you too. If you enjoy the program, drop us a note. If you enjoy the program, let us see it in your ratings. We appreciate that so much. And join us on the very next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.